Hello, everybody. Welcome to this lecture on understanding how the media works. A short and hopefully very practical guide that's tailor-made for edible city solutions. This lecture is part of a curriculum developed by Edisnet, and is part of the MOOC, the massive open online course that is being developed in this project. So please follow me along as I will share some hands-on experiences over quite a few years of working with edible city initiatives and how to get their press coverage. So first of all, we have to understand how the media works and what is newsworthy. It's maybe a new word for some of you, but we'll talk quite a lot about it. Okay, so we have to understand, first of all, that we have to make it easy for the journalists. You know, they need us and we need them. We need coverage, the journalists need news stories. And as soon as we understand that these newsrooms are struggling to fill their columns and their broadcasts and their blogs and whatever every day with more news stories, then we also understand that we are doing an important part and an important service for them in providing them with good content. They don't have time to hunt for stories or go check out any sort of potential idea that might be relevant. So they need good news stories with great news hooks. I'll explain that later, what that is, that their readers will read or click on or listen to, that will make it make sense to be a news outlet, basically. And then very importantly, also that we build these relationships with these journalists so that it becomes a mutually reinforcing process where they contact us when they need stories on our sort of topics. And we have a door open next time we have a community event or some sort of initiative that we want to get some media coverage for. So how do newspapers prioritize? They have a sort of strict order of prioritization, moving from the top to the bottom. It's the stories that the editor has explicitly told the journalist to cover. It could be something that's very urgent, that's happening in the city news or local news or global news that day, or that the morning editorial meeting has jointly decided to cover. This is an example of photos from an editorial meeting. Or something that a journalist himself has come up with and pitched to their colleagues in maybe this morning meeting or weekly meeting. And stories that are pitched on the phone where people that are not part of the editorial staff call or take contact or send an email to the editorial staff and suggest that they write about this and that topic. And or the last and also least likely that they will cover, but they will very often do that as well, or ideas or even complete full stories that have been submitted to them via email. So we have to understand our local news and how they work and how their journalists work. They're looking for relevant stories that will generate clicks. So what you have to do is to sort of try to understand how your local media works. What kind of stories do they cover? Or if you look at several different newspapers and magazines or news outlets, radio stations, etc., which ones cover the kind of stories that have a tendency to cover the kind of stories that you want to share? The main national newspaper might focus more on nationally important stories, not so much a local community event, for example, whereas a small newspaper that focuses on one district and has many soft news, they might be a very likely source to collaborate with, to have a joint story. So follow your media locally and try to figure out what journalists write the kind of news stories that you want to share, and just write down the name and keep them in the back of your head and contact them when you have a news story. I'll talk more about that. But first, we will talk more about what is exactly a news story and also how to approach the different journalists. So this just goes a little bit more into detail of what I just said of getting to know your local news media and trying to figure out who are the kind of journalists that will cover the kind of story that you are right now looking to cover. And for that, you also need to understand maybe do you have to do something to make it relevant for that news media? or will they take it as it is? Is it already interesting enough, or do you maybe have to adapt your idea to make it into a better news story? So I wanted to really, really understand the super important concept of a news hook. What is a news hook? What makes a reader look at this headline and think, I want to read this story, or that something that grabs the attention of a listener at a local radio show, or it's what makes you think, oh, interesting, and tune in or focus on the page, or not flip through, not change channel. So you need to get inside the head of your wanted audience. And then there are many ways of doing that, but you have to adapt your story a little bit. So a good news story that gets inside your reader's mind, so you have to look at it from the point of view of the newspaper or the radio channel, is one that covers one of these news hooks. And the more of these news hooks, the better. So readers are interested in reading about something that covers proximity, something that's near us. It's much more interesting to read about something happening in our own town than something happening in a small town in another continent. We're more likely to read about something where there's some sort of prominence, someone we know, or someone that is a local celebrity, or a name that everybody knows, or a local politician. We're more likely to read that story. Timeliness is about what's relevant to read about now, what's relevant now during, if it's spring, a lot of gardening news are very interesting, for example, whereas in November, hardly any news outlets will talk about garden projects because it's just not in season. So it's what's hot today but gone tomorrow. Odd stories can often get very good coverage if it's something surprising or unusual, or something that a headline will grab your attention, something unexpected or bizarre, or if it has a specific consequence. Will this mean something to the lives of people? Will a closing of a road, how will that impact people? Some will say that it will impact those that maybe used to drive their cars through that road, or maybe it has a direct impact on the people living along that road, or the children that go to school along that road. So does it have a specific impact on people's lives? Does it have a consequence for their day-to-day living? If it has zero consequence for anyone, then people will not stop to read about it. Or if it only has a consequence for a very few people, then also people will not bother to read about it. Then conflict, of course, it's always interesting when there's a scandal or something unexpected happening. But our kind of stories of edible city initiatives that usually not very conflict full. So that's usually not the news hook we're looking for. But we can very often flesh out the human interest side of things, the heartwarming aspects where generations meet, where kids have fun, where lonely people find companionship, where there's some sort of human emotion that is triggered by the story that we're sharing. It's something heartwarming, like a nice event, something that brings people together. That's always good. And then the extremes of something that is it's something completely out of the ordinary, unusual. Not necessarily oddity is shocking, but extremes is this massive event or a tiny impact, like these, talking in superlatives basically. And then scandals is a little bit like conflicts. Scandals and gossip can be relevant to get printed in the newspapers, but usually not so interesting for these edible city initiatives. But the impact is quite related to consequence. Does the news have a huge impact to a surprising amount of people? So, adding up numbers, how many people came to your community market last weekend, and what was the revenue from the farmers market that had a record weekend, and sort of add up the numbers. And then as we're working on a news story, we need to know that the journalist will look for a story that will have at least 2 news hooks, and the more the better. So I want to share a quick case study. It's not a very relevant related topic at all. It's about e-scooters. It's just a news story that's printed in a local newspaper in Oslo called Vårt Oslo. And the headline is huge support for e-scooter rentals in Oslo. And then the text below it generally talks about the benefits of the e-scooter rentals. It has several quotes by the CEO of Voi, one of the e-scooter rental providers. It includes data on usage and supporting research data from Copenhagen for some reason that underlines the popularity of these services in Denmark. And the CEO is quoted with a range of specific suggestions on how local politicians can regulate e-scooters in a way that would benefit the population, putting Voi in a positive light as a constructive partner for the public sector. So this looks like a news story, but we can pretty much, once we've learned a little bit about news structure and about newshooks, we can tell that this was written by Voi and sent to that newspaper, and they printed it as it was, published it online as it was. So if we take a critical look at this case, the article only highlights data that makes Voi look good. The survey itself was probably commissioned and paid by Voi, and questions were probably designed to get answers that would not be negative towards Voi and the e-scooters. No other e-scooter companies are mentioned. No critics of e-scooters are balancing the article. And it's accompanied by a photo of a good-looking and conservatively dressed CEO. And it pretends to be balanced, and it improves the newsworthiness or the newshooks by making reference to a recent ban in Copenhagen and requesting Oslo politicians to team up with Voi to create good solutions because e-scooters, quote unquote, are so popular. So, and then it's also accompanied by ads, clickable ads that someone. I remember seeing when I first saw this article, it was accompanied by an advertisement for a TV channel that had Formula One racing. So the readers of this story are also quite likely to be interested in the contents in that link of that ad that was on the same page. And then if we zoom out a little bit and look at that whole newspaper and the number of articles that they have written about Voi e-scooters, you see that, it's the same photo that comes up again and again. These are just, one screenshot of a few of their articles. But all the articles that are exclusively positive about Voi, they're all accompanied by the same kind of quotes by the same CEO. They're accompanied by the same photo. So we can tell that Vårt Oslo, this news outlet, published these press releases that were targeted and written to suit that media. And they just copied, pasted it, and published it. It did the newspaper a favor because they got a very clickable and very newsworthy article to share on their webpage. They generate clicks and advertisement revenues, and this is what keeps the newspaper going. They wouldn't have published it if it hadn't been for the fact that Voi knew how to write these articles in a way that makes them newsworthy. So they try to balance it a little bit by bringing some complementary facts, and they try to come off as not being a bullish company or whatever. They try to be, a good partner for the municipality and a popular service that a lot of citizens have an interest in. So from the viewpoint of Vårt Oslo, the news outlet, with a minimum time invested of just copying and pasting content, they've generated very click-friendly and reader-friendly and newsworthy articles that help them to generate the revenue that they need for the sort of more investigative or in-depth journalism that they do more of. So I want to talk a little bit about how to create a newsworthy event, or to, create the excuse for the media to write about your initiative. I have a good example here from an edible seed initiative in Canada called Microhabitat, and they have a rooftop garden business in Montreal in Canada. So just a little bit about the company. Their mission is to implement urban agriculture to improve urban environment, the lifestyle of city dwellers, and encourage a better understanding of environmental issues. And they have a business model that consists of installing, maintaining, and harvesting rooftop gardens for corporate clients. And then the crops are either used by the corporate sponsors or they're donated to local food banks. So you see their schematic business model in the 1, 2, 3 drawing here. And then they wanted to get media coverage about their company to get new clients. So this happened during COVID. The business was still going, but more and more companies having home offices meant that the rooftop gardens at the corporate offices downtown were becoming less and less popular and less useful for the companies. And they had quite a lot of trouble getting new customers on board. And it was also during that time, it was just very difficult to get any news coverage for anything that was not about COVID. So the challenge for the company was to come up with an idea for an attractive happening that would make the company, Microhabitat, and their services newsworthy, so much that several news outlets would cover it and new customers would flock to them. Quite ambitious, but I think still a very good challenge for a company. And then the solution was that they came up with a new system where they would announce that all the crops from all the rooftop gardens they managed across the city would be donated to local food banks. So up until then, the crops had been given back to the company or the company cafeteria or whatever the company where the garden was located. But from then on, they pooled all the resources and funneled it towards local food banks. And by doing that, they managed to get news coverage from newspapers, from radio stations, from local newspapers, and even national news coverage. Why did they get that? Well, let's try to look at these news stories about how they will deliver their harvest to food banks and how that looks from 3 different angles. So from the point of view of Microhabitat, they were able to talk extensively about their services. You see the co-founder, Alexander Ferrari-Roy, explaining in detail on the morning news their business model of how they do this, implement these gardens for corporate customers. They managed to build a very strong brand recognition, and they got quite a few new clients. From the viewer point of view, someone who was not a client, you read something that felt relevant to their lives. It was newsworthy because it was local, because it was heartwarming, had a good solution to the economic crisis that followed in the footpath of COVID, etc. And it made the reader want to support this company because they support local food banks. And for the media, it was a very visually appealing story because it was connected to COVID, so it was relevant during that day, but it was something different. It was, green surroundings. The reporters would walk into a garden and have live broadcasts showing the bountiful harvest, etc. So it was visual. It was a different story than, all the repetitive COVID hospital sort of news. And it gave it also a very feel good story in the middle of a very difficult time. And also it was a story that was very easy to share on social media. So why did it work? If we remember the newshooks, when it comes to proximity, it was a local story. So citizens in Montreal was like, wow, oh, this is downtown. Oh, I recognize that building. Oh, I know this place. It didn't have any prominences or celebrities. It was quite timely because it was attached to COVID news. Oddity, it's still a little bit unusual to garden on rooftops, so that had that sort of unusual side to it. In terms of consequence, it was great because any office worker that had a corporate office downtown could now suggest that their company should collaborate with this company to maybe do something with their rooftop terrace or some of their outdoor spaces and take action on this. In terms of human interest, it was a great angle with feeding homeless people through the food banks, especially since it would be quite expected that the customers that we know from experience that having these sort of services for corporate offices, they're less likely to be the ones wanting to bring the vegetables home. They they like the concept of it and the idea of it, but maybe they're not the home cookers to the same degree. So it's quite expected that these customers wouldn't actually be that interested in eating what was growing on the roof, not because there was anything wrong with it, but it's just more useful to channel it towards the local food banks. And in terms of superlatives or records, they really bumped up the numbers in terms of the quantity. They're like talking about thousands of pounds of produce. I'm sure they haven't really weighed it, but just being able to phrase the amount or the quantity in that way made it have more of an impact. There was nothing scandalous about it, but it does have an impact even on those that were not directly involved either in having an office that would have them as customers or being at the receiving end with food banks. But it's something that made people feel good to see that there are good connections being made within their home city, and people are doing good things to help others. So it's heartwarming and nice for anyone to take part in this, or even to be reading this news. You'll read about it in the newspaper, and then you will feel good about it, and feel good about your community and about your city and about these green initiatives. So yeah, I think it's a great example of a small company really understanding that they needed to work on the newsworthiness and then launching it and getting great coverage from it. I've selected, just to get you started, a couple of key suggestions for how to build a local news stories. So I want you to think about, can it be linked to a local event, for example, a festival or annual events, such as if your city has a tree day or a biodiversity day? And if not, can you create a unique event, or is it Halloween, or is it, midsummer? What's some sort of community event that will be relevant in your area? And then try to flip around some roles to create a surprising setting. For example, is it something that where young people are teaching adults, or is a neighborhood initiative helping the initiative? So what is surprising about it? Can you flip around some ingredients to make it something a bit more unusual? And then, are there unique personal stories in your project, or can a politician or a local celebrity or someone that has some sort of local influence or whatever, someone that has a wide reach, can they be involved in some way? Maybe there's a local celebrity chef, for example, at one of the most interesting or highest rated restaurants in your city that can be the face of harvesting seasonal crops and preparing seasonal menus, for example. And then always thinking, are there good photo opportunities? Will this look great in the photo? And also, if possible, set aside a budget or contract a professional photographer to join the event so that you have really good, high quality, high resolution images that you can share with the news outlet after the event. And then I also wanted you to think about, what are the non-newsworthy events? Like, what's fun to us but not really interesting to anybody else? So projects that are doing more or less the same as what they did last year. It's not novel enough. Activities that happen too far away to be interesting to a local newspaper. Or activities that occur at a time when the reader is not interested. I mentioned it before that gardening stories are super interesting in the news in March, April, May, and not so much in October, November, December, because it's just the will of the will of the year that different topics sort of trend during different seasons. But also, I think you should remember that in some cities, urban agriculture is still a novelty. So even setting up a new community garden can be really hitting the front pages in one community, whereas in another community, they may already have many green initiatives. So the launch of one new project may not make a difference or may not make the headlines. So your context also matters quite a lot. And then quickly, I want to talk to you about the writing structure as you're working with a press release or a text that you're writing to your local newspaper or news outlets. I want you to understand the inverted pyramid of news writing. And it's very, very different from how we write in a regular text. I'll come back to that. But this is, we have to really, really focus on not what's important for us to share, but what will be interesting for a reader to read. So the newsworthiness, when we talk about news hooks, it's not our point of view, but the point of view of the reader. So we have to imagine who is the reader of that local newspaper, or who is the reader of that blog or listener to that radio channel. So we always start with the most important information on top. That is what the reader must know. And then we throw in the additional information that helps the reader understand, but this is not super essential. And then we ended off with information that's nice to have. And we do this because the reader can stop reading anytime. You know, very often when you're flipping through a magazine or reading a newspaper article, you'll scan the first few lines, and then it's only if you're really interested that you read it all the way to the end. So we have to adjust for that. We put the most important stuff first, the most important quotes in the beginning, the juiciest information in the beginning, and then slowly less and less interesting facts, or more like factual information towards the bottom. This means that we have to unlearn how we usually write things when we write things, how we've been taught to write in school, which is very linear. When we learn how to write a story in school, we start about, first thing number 1 happened, and then thing number 2 happened, and because of that, thing number 3 happened. And then from all of that, we concluded with number 4 as a good conclusion, and we all said that we'd had a great day and went home from, whatever. So that is a linear way of writing, where you just list things in the order that they occurred. But we want to think about inverted pyramids of most important, supporting information, and then just the factual towards the bottom. So you have to really think about working with your text content and move around the different paragraphs. To make it even more complicated, I'm going to add another inverted pyramid. This is in the beginning of the text, in the most important section. You should try to respond to the 5 W's. Who, what, where, when, and why. What happened? These are the details that you want the reader to understand from reading only the first paragraph. And then you continue to build the text by adding a key quote from key person and a supporting fact. And this should be maybe the project manager or the local politician, or the most important quote from the most important person. And then you continue to build your story with additional, less important information and facts that support these, and then quotes that support this from a less important person. I'm not saying unimportant, I'm just saying less important than the first quote. And then you add in background information, and then towards the bottom you have the general information. And here it's important to keep it short and sweet. If you could stay within 1 A4 page, if you write an email, and it's better to have lots of paragraph and lots of space when you write the text, because they're not going to publish a long thing. And the journalist, you can present the text, and it can be beautifully written. It can be a really wonderful event that connects with a lot of the news hooks. But maybe the timing is just terrible, that on that very same day there was a huge fire in the city, or something else happened that really took up all the news space that day. Because in the end, the journalists and the editors of that news source, they will make the decision on what is relevant to post in our news outlet today. Maybe they will share your news story a week from now if it's not something that's very, very time delicate. Or maybe they just will ignore it. That's just the way it works. And we also have to remember that the journalists will cut any text that they find redundant, and they start reading from the bottom and up. So if we want them to cut something, we want them to cut the general information and the background information from the bottom. We don't want them to cut the top information, which is the who, what, when, where, why. So that's also another reason for writing in this inverted pyramid style. And always, always, always put ourselves in the shoes of the reader, and never forget that the only reason why someone will publish something that we've prepared for them is that they think that this will be interesting for the readers. This is something that the readers will spend a minute reading, or this is something that people will spend 30 seconds watching on a news show instead of flipping channels, or this is something that people will pay attention to in a radio show. Also, I think it's important to mention that you want to maintain the right to do a proofreading, but you have to. So very often, for example, you will talk to a journalist about covering an event, and maybe they were there. Maybe you prepare them you've written a text with the inverted pyramid for them, and then they say, "Oh, can I call you? Can I call you? And I want to have a few extra questions." And then you have a quick conversation on the phone. And then it's important to ask, once you've finished your draft, could I just proofread it? And that's how you make sure that you're correctly quoted and that they've understood what you've tried to convey to them. So if they send something to you for proofreading, read through it quickly, make the suggested corrections quickly in some other color or something, so it's easy for them to see what you suggested, and send it back right away. Don't wait until the next day. And then just a few final tricks. Try to use the active voice. The students built the furniture, not furniture was built by the student. This is just one example. And if you get published, be your publisher's best friend, you know. If they're posting a link on their social media, share it in your social media. Use tags, use hashtags, you know, use everything that you can do to make sure that the link that they post get a lot of readership, because that means that they understand that, oh, these news stories about this stakeholder, they get a lot of clicks on it. So next time they call about some other event that they're having or some other activity that they're hosting, I'll remember that those articles got quite a lot of readers, so they'll be more likely to post it the next time. And it also helps build a good relationship with your local news media, so that they can also reach out to you if they're like, you know, it's spring and we'd like to have a story on gardens. Maybe you have some suggestions, for example. So be super useful to the news outlet that has published you. Spread their stories on all platforms. And then in karma is great when you're good. When you spread good karma, you get good karma. So it always pays well to be a good friend of your local news media. And I think that's it. I want to thank you for your attention. I hope this is really useful. Underneath this presentation, there will also be posted a link to a publication that EduCityNet has made, built on the same principles in this presentation, but that has more examples and exercises and case studies in it. So feel free to look at that one for more inspiration and inside knowledge for generating more communication and press coverage for your initiative. And best of luck. And thank you very much.